Hello, everyone. Warm welcome to this keynote lecture. I will be presenting about climate justice, community repair, and dignity under urban extreme heat and floods. So, today's lecture is going to be a combination of different things that we have been doing and different frameworks that we have been applying in different communities. So, first of all, why this topic? So, as you all know, urban settlements in the global south, they are the fastest growing communities where we are seeing a lot of overcrowding. There is a lot of inadequate infrastructure. There is poor healthcare access. And all of these issues, they make urban centers such as Lahore and Karachi as epicenters of climate vulnerabilities. We know that these effects are not equal for all populations and all groups, and especially these effects are particularly disproportionate and despite being very synergistic, meaning that they are cascading and they affect other negative impacts on the city, especially in the case of heat waves and in the case of floods. But these effects are particularly more disproportionate when it comes to women and communities of women living in urban centers. There is also this issue of cities of the global north and the global south, and this is particularly relevant because the cities of the global north, they are relatively well-to-do and there are greater capacities for adaptation and also for mitigation. And in that sense, cities of the global south, they become these urban centers that are much more vulnerable to climate change, and there is also a lot of inequity in the representation of the cities of the global south. And when I say global south, I do not just mean this geographical connotation, but it also means the connotations of, colonial, post colonial histories, and also the marginalizations that the countries and the cities that are based in the global south, for example, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many others, they continue to face on repeated basis. So, when it comes to representation of the global north and global south, in some of our own recent research, we have also seen that much of the research on climate psychology, especially on climate related disasters, it's pretty much centered in the global north. For example, countries like USA, Australia, England, Germany, Netherlands, and Spain. These are really the epicenters of a lot of research that happens on climate change. On the other hand, there are very few centers in the global south that you would see in network analysis. So each bubble on this chart, for example, showcases how much of the research is being produced where. So you see that global south countries, for example, Thailand, Pakistan, Malaysia, they are very less represented. And Malaysia, I would even put it in the global north, given that it's a very strong economy and much more economically, diverse and stable country. So based on our own analysis and some of the network analysis and landscape analysis that we have been doing, we have also realized that we need more South Center frameworks that capture the nuances and specific problems that cities of the Global South and the communities in the Global South face. So that kind of brings in that it's really important how does kind of this landscape analysis positions our cities in the global south, for example, Lahore or Karachi, even cities in Kenya or Nigeria where we have been working. So this research kind of gives this sensibility to look into communities that are much more vulnerable and that are at the front and center of climate disasters. So to that end, we have built a few frameworks that we use in combination. So the first one is the dual exposure one, which we kind of problematize not towards the people, but as the environmental layers that cause different difficulties for the people and for the communities that live through climate change. So we see that double exposure, which is related to heat waves and flash floods, which is kind of like, a very known story to the residents and the people of Pakistan. Especially as psychologists, we have been seeing amplified risks to women's mental health and their psychosocial well-being. And it's not just that, like, these floods and these heat waves, they are coming in silos and they're having these effects in silos. It's also multiple other layers and elements that play into it. For example, there are certain cultural expectations that are differentiated and very much expected from women. There is added gendered mobility related restrictions that might come with either like, heat waves or with flash floods. There is more socioeconomic precarity, which destabilizes women's informal incomes in a much more drastic ways. And these kinds of like, combinations, they make heat and flash floods, and sometimes they happen at the same time. So for example, recently in Lahore, during extreme heat, we also experienced floods. So this is one of the framework that we have been using in analyzing and looking at some of the communities we have been working with. Then I think this framework also gives us a better sensibility of looking into how women's spaces are utilized, occupied, and used. So there is a lot of informal social safety nets that women rely on each other, which gets disrupted in these double exposures. Then there is formal caregiving networks that women develop around themselves, around the work, especially when they are in informal workspaces. There's a lot of unrecognized childcare and other roles that are also exacerbated in the cases of heat waves and floods, for example, when children are not going to schools or when they are not able to participate in informal economies other than education, because that's kind of like, also quite diversified across Pakistan and across different communities. And last but not the least, the acknowledgement of food management and other care works that women participate in, and how these care works, they also get kind of extended and also exacerbated during these double disasters like heat waves and floods. So based on that, we have developed this framework, which we call care and repair work. Mostly we call it multidimensional repair work. It's kind of exacerbation of care work and repair work, both by men and women. But our studies in Pakistan and in Kenya, they have shown that this kind of work, it gets much more difficult and much more heavier for women compared to men. So we are not like, disregarding or undermining any of the work and the care work and the burdens that men carry. But our work was mostly kind of like, looking at who is contributing more in the communities, and in the case of informal settlements, where the burdens become much more disproportionate and much more heavier. So there is a lot of familial repair that we have seen going on in these communities. There is much more individual repair as well. So their personal work also gets increased, but the familiar care work also gets increased. Then there is like, the community work that these women, they support each other within their communities, that also gets heightened. And then there is also infrastructure repair work. By infrastructure repair work, we would mean that if there are adaptation or mitigation related, like, elements in the households or in the work that women do, that can also increase. So these frameworks, they have been utilized both in informal settlements of Kibera in Kenya and also in Pakistan in Tent City, in other places in Karachi, where we have seen some support for this work. Another framework that has been, like, until this particular year, quite theoretical, but now we are also getting a lot more support for this work. So as you know, in psychology, there has been these two frames where there is the individual frame that we are expecting a lot more from the individual, especially when it comes to kind of like, micro adaptation to climate change. And on the other hand, we have these systemic frames where, like, the systems, the cities, and let's say the local governance and national government, they should be participating towards mitigation or climate mitigation. But in countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many others, where systemic frameworks are not that powerful, or where the state is not for instance, financially as stable as in many cities of the global north, in those cases we have to come for we have to look for solutions that are somewhere in the center, because we cannot burden the individuals of the global south so much with the the climate related damages that have been happening, and many of them they are also the victims of these climate disasters. So we have been looking at this community frame, which is relatively more at the center, where men, women, people in communities, they come together and they try to do more work that is related to adaptation, which can then lead to more mitigation, because from individual level we work with communities, and then communities can actually directly and indirectly enforce some things on policy level through the system's frames. So based on that community frame, and this is the frame that we have been quite strongly pushing forward. On that, we have added this additional layer, which we call now integrated community frame, where we look at the communal care and repair work, particularly in communities, and how that affects women's mental health. And in that frame, especially when we use it in the global south, as we are also focused on and capitalizing on a lot of work and research and commitment that is also coming from this understanding of local culture, cultural norms, and cultural understandings, we are focusing much more on dignity, respect in community, how to build, rebuild, and co build that kind of community work and community articulation that is focused on dignity and respect, especially when it comes to women. So based on that, we have been using this particular frame in many places. And I'll just give you quickly some examples. Initially, it was the applications that were very much hands-on. We were working in communities in Karachi, where we saw that there were applications of care, repair, and dignity in the context of communities that were directly impacted by climate change. And initial work that has been published now, it's coming from my colleagues Nosheen Anwar, Arabella Fraser, and Joe Mulligan. We have been working on this project since 2023. It was funded by UCRI initially, and now we have this cyclic grant for the last 2 years. So in this framework, we also see that there was this implication where we focused on how communal living and community articulation that has been a way of survival and also resistance and resilience in these women in certain communities, especially in tent city in Karachi. As you see on in the picture on the left, these communities, they are really kind of where spaces are co-occupied by multiple families. So they are covered spaces where women, they do most of the daily chores and the work, taking care, and a lot of care and repair work that goes into managing a household. In addition to that, as you can see in the center, in the sweltering heat, how women, they in the very difficult situations, they manage a lot of care and repair work. And on the picture on the right, you would also see that there is a lot of communal sharing of the resources that these women have. And this becomes the powerhouse of the community. So if there is water, that is shared water. Everyone contributes to bringing this water, but then it's available for whoever needs as much as they need, right? Then I think another powerful element that we saw in form of dignity, respect, and mutual communal living was how in this tent compound there were multiple families. They were using this space also as shared space where they would sit down, they would do knitting, they would do different other artistic activities that they would later on also sell into different places in the market. So it's not just a place which we see as a space of precarity. It's also full of a lot of respect, a lot of dignity, a lot of hard work, labor, resilience, and resistance that you see in these communities, especially led by women. When it comes to adaptation, I think it's really a beautiful example where you would see women digging these sand pits and raising the level of the houses in such a way that they can protect their belongings from water related damages. So there is this kind of resilience, resistance, and adaptation, all of that going on, while at the same time we cannot forget the illegality tags that sometimes the state and the city would put on these people, because many times they're also labeled as encroachers. But I think that's kind of the element that we want to flip, and we want to see the real stories behind these narratives that we hear from the state and from other narrative makers, so to say. So another thing that was really powerful was how much recycling of resources that these women do. So, for instance, if they are washing their clothes and if there is extra water from a lot of additional care work, they would recycle that water for doing for building these community gardens where they can grow some produce or herbs that they can share within their community. So now I think given that we had a lot of observation based and really a lot of bottom up community based dignity work that we had been doing in these communities, we have also seen applications of this work more recently in some of the quantitative and qualitative work that we have been doing more on structured basis. So, for instance, we have been working on heat and flood beyond the body, where we are looking at, we are using some of these frameworks and trying to explore the co-production of knowledge during heat waves and floods during and after these major events, for example, in Karachi. So one of our paper, which is currently in production with the Journal of Anxiety Disorders, it looks at the impacts of heat waves and floods and how different intersecting economic infrastructural vulnerabilities play into it, but also how these care and repair networks led by women and run by women, they're also very important. They're critical, but yet they are quite overlooked in some senses. So this is kind of some of the work that we have been doing, but now also new scholars they have been picking up on this work. For instance, one of the projects that we have been doing in South America, along with my collaborator Nubia Vale Rodriguez, there we have been looking at how climate activism among women can also be a form of care as a bridge between climate resilience and climate justice. So we cannot look at climate justice and climate activism without looking at this interpretive lived experience of resilience and resistance, but also using this dignity framework. So this work is also currently under revision for publication. So we have been working on this particular project for the last 1.5 years, and it's coming to a closure. So I'd be happy to share some of the findings with you. Similarly, we have used this care and repair and also identity related dynamics with migrant populations. So these are frameworks that are not just limited to climate related disasters, but they can really look at any form of well-being, bodily experiences, or interpretive phenomenologies. So one of our researchers at University of Oslo, who's also a Global Mind student, she has been working on this project where she looks at an interpretive phenomenological analysis of Pakistani migrant women who live in Norway. And in this framework, we are also looking at care and repair dynamics that women engage in when they build these female friendships. So how do they gather that resilience and at the same time resistance as well? Last but not the least, we are also looking at some of this framework and trying to apply it in the rural setups, in the rural communities. So one of the project was about climate change, faith, and structural vulnerability. So again, here we focused on these gendered lenses, but also specifically on the implications for women. Here we adapted some Q methodologies and we used those methods to push forward the kind of work that would look at, like, women's respect related norms, dignity related norms, and incorporating that decolonial and feminist work into this lens. It has been quite vital to our work. And I think I would really love to engage with more discussion and questions from all of you. After this talk, if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to me at gulnaz.anjum@ul.ie, which is an ID for University of Limerick. And if you also have an interest or queries about our Global Minds program, please feel free to reach out to us. We also run this Solidarity Hub at University of Oslo, where many of our Global Mind students, they volunteer and they participate as researchers, as young researchers. So if you have any questions or any comments about the lecture or about the initiatives that we are running, I would be very happy to take your questions and have further discussion. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for inviting me.